Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to my critical analysis of Fallout New Vegas' first expansion pack, Dead Money. We just finished speaking with Father Elijah, so it's time to explore the villa, and boy is there a lot to say. I typically start by going in the order that the quests appear, which means the first stop will be the police station. It's not too far from the middle of the villa, which makes sense for the location of any law enforcement base of operations. On the way to the police station, we're introduced to some of the more baser elements of the Sierra Madre gameplay-wise. Just off to the side, the player will probably stumble across one of Dean Domino's stashes, and this is one of the best to come across in Dead Money, giving the player a generous mix of resources as well as a shotgun in decent condition with several rounds. This is a great way of immediately incentivizing the player to always be willing to explore off the beaten path. The Sierra Madre may be a more linear experience than Fallout players are generally accustomed to, but by no means does it fail in providing the player with rewarding exploration. I've often seen people express the notion that this is one of the weaker expansions due to its linearity. On one hand, I see where one could be coming from with this criticism. Fallout 3 had two very linear expansions, Operation Anchorage and Mothership Zeta, both of which bookended the game and are considered to be by far the weakest of that game's expansions. So following the launch of New Vegas, for the very first expansion to turn out to be a more linear journey, I completely get how this would have rubbed anyone the wrong way. However, unlike Operation Anchorage and Mothership Zeta, Dead Money actually has a fair amount of exploration in it. In Operation Anchorage and Mothership Zeta, the secrets were simply data files and holotapes that were laying off to the side. It was the equivalent to Call of Duty intel collectibles. Sure, you could get a cool perk by finding all the intel in Operation Anchorage, but that was about as far as it went. In Dead Money, the villa itself is constructed in a way that allows for a fair amount of rewarding exploration. And in many ways, the player will have to weigh the risk versus reward for exploring different parts of the Sierra Madre. That door over there might lead to some goodies, but is it worth fighting through a whole pack of ghost people? That pocket of cloud looks like it leads down an alleyway. Maybe there's something worth finding back there? There's a surprising amount of nooks and crannies littered throughout the villa, and it can be extremely rewarding to stumble across another of Dean Domino's stashes. Who knows, maybe you'll even come across the fabled Sierra Madre snow globe. Ooh. Also gives you 2,000 Sierra Madre tokens, it's fucking amazing. As well, Papa Eli's generous enough to let us partake in the quests in whatever order we feel like. This doesn't have any particularly noticeable consequences, which is a bit of a letdown, but it can be fun to try your luck in different sections of the villa however you please. It's a small way of allowing the player the freedom to go about questing however they like, and I'll always appreciate that. Still though, it would have been nice to see some kind of consequences for the order we do the quests. Perhaps if we took too long to get to Christine, she would be more apprehensive later on about going down the elevator shaft as a result of her spending too much time in the autodock. Or maybe Dean would get offended if we didn't go for him first, making it more difficult to get on his good side via dialogue. Stuff like that would have been really cool, I think. I enjoy the level of exploration granted to the player throughout the villa, and I think Obsidian did a really great job of pulling off the risk versus reward factor. As much as some players may have wanted the Sierra Madre to be this big open map, I think you can only go so far with that before it begins to clash with the plot. In the base game of New Vegas, it made sense that the player would have the freedom that they do because everything in the Mojave is basically at a stalemate. Benny won't be leaving Vegas anytime soon, and he's literally digging a tunnel into the Lucky 38 from across New Vegas at the tops, which I can't even imagine how long of a process that would be, even with Yes Man. Hey! So it makes sense for him to always be there until confronted by the courier. Mr. House needs the Platinum chip in order to proceed with his plan to upgrade the Securitron army, and he's also waiting for the NCR and Legion to go to war. Speaking of which, the NCR are too caught up in their bureaucratic paperwork to get any actual work done, which is reflected in what we see throughout the wastes in locations like Camp Forlorn Hope, Prim, and Camp Golf. They've also already got control of Hoover Dam, so the higher-ups see no incentive to jump into further conflict with Caesar's Legion, aside from the occasional skirmish and general defensive measures. Caesar needs to access the bunker beneath the Legion's camp so that he can use the artillery against the NCR when the Legion assaults Hoover Dam, but he can't do this without the Platinum chip. Everything going on hinges on what the courier, and technically Benny, decides to do regarding the Platinum chip. Time is not necessarily of the essence. The same cannot be said for Dead Money. Father Elijah doesn't want anyone screwing around, and there's a toxic cloud that will eventually kill everyone there, assuming that the ghost people don't get to them first. The stakes are very clear, and it would be kind of bizarre if the player could just go exploring some area unrelated to the tasks at hand. Don't misunderstand, there is exploration, but the exploration that takes place occurs in areas that the player is directed to explore in the first place, such as the Puesta del Sol and the Salida del Sol. It's very meticulously designed around the idea of linear style progression, and it fits within the narrative that Dead Money is trying to tell very well. Overall, I think it's very well executed. Upon arriving at the police station, the player will immediately notice the large cell across the room. Inside of it is the super mutant Nightkin dog, who is sitting facing the corner and refuses to move. The door to the cage can only be opened with a key, so for now we'll just have to leave him be. Father Elijah mentioned earlier that we should explore the police station first because the super mutant is more docile and easy to command. This makes sense from his character, but it's also clear after doing just a little bit of exploration why Obsidian suggested the player to come here first. This is a great area to acquire a variety of resources to get us started on our journey through the Sierra Madre. There are multiple weapons that you can find here, from melee weapons including the Cosmic Knife, which has high DPS, to the Police Pistol, which does extra damage to limbs, again, really useful against the ghost people, and even if you have high enough science or lockpicking, the Automatic Rifle, a powerful but inaccurate LMG. There's also a set of Sierra Madre security armor, and it's in pretty decent condition. The armor isn't really that great, but it's a significant step up from the jumpsuit that we start off with. There's also food, some water, beds to rest on, crafting supplies, and various other supplies. There are also several vending machine codes, holodisks that allow for the player to access more items at the Sierra Madre vending machines, including weapon repair kits, 308 rifle rounds, 357 magnum rounds, and steady. I mentioned before that you can play the missions in the villa however you prefer, but aside from experimenting or roleplay specific player decisions, I can't really think of any reason not to come to the police station first. It's a complete goldmine for any player starting out, regardless of their build. There are also several radios that have been turned on around the station, and this will be most players' first introduction to this particular environmental hazard. Elijah mentioned earlier that the radios and speakers have corroded over the past 2 centuries, now emitting frequencies that will cause the collars to eventually explode. So the player will know, unless they just haven't been paying attention, in which case... oh shit. Sorry about your luck. They've got to get these things turned off. Elijah even reminds the player of this upon entering the station. When the player gets too close to a radio or speaker, they'll be notified that their collar is emitting a high-pitched beeping noise, and a beeping will begin to sound off, alerting the player that they need to either hurry up and shut down the source of the frequency, or get the hell out of Dodge. This shit has become known to many players as the epitome of raw, unfiltered anxiety. Oh boy, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy. No. Come on. Come on. The longer the player is in range of foreign frequencies, the faster their collar will begin to beep, and let me tell you that this will undoubtedly make for some of the most intense gameplay scenarios that you will find in any Fallout game. That goddamn beeping will get you on edge immediately, and you encounter it a lot. I love it. Dead Money is already known for being oppressively atmospheric and brutally difficult, but toss in the anxiety of dealing with these speakers and radios, and you've got an experience that expertly keeps the player on edge the entire time. When you're running around the villa and you know you've got to push through a pocket of cloud or fight some ghost people, it can really add to the stress of the situation the moment you hear that beeping go off. It's a total monkey wrench that's meant to force the player to step back and think, and that's the best thing about it. It's a surprise mechanic, but it'll never immediately punish the player in an unfair way. Once you hear that beeping, you're given plenty of time to take a step back or just press onwards, either ultimately disabling the device or escaping its range. That being said, you still need to remain aware of it and try to find out where the beeping is coming from, as you'll often find yourself running through certain parts of the villa multiple times, meaning that every time you encounter a radio or speaker, you'll probably want to disable it as soon as possible. What's more impressive is that they found ways to implement this environmental hazard in a relatively balanced way. When you come across this hazard, you're not immediately punished. You'll really only ever be punished if you just charge in without thinking. You could get swarmed by ghost people, get lost in a cloud pocket, or even step into range of another radio or speaker, meaning you'll have to also escape its range in the short amount of time that you're allotted. On top of that, not every speaker is destructible. This doesn't really become relevant until we've entered the casino, but it's still worth noting that speakers emitting red lights instead of blue lights cannot be disabled no matter what. They're few and far between, but they act as something of a double whammy where now you've really got to plot out what it is that you're going to need to do in order to circumvent this hazard. Here in the police station, the player will need to seek out each radio, stepping back to the front entrance whenever that beep begins to pick up too much. There are only a handful of radios, and it's uncommon to have to deal with this many in one spot, at least within the villa, so it's an excellent tutorial in that it makes it abundantly clear to the player that once that beeping starts, you had better hurry up. There's also a basement in the police station where a rather bizarre message will play over the speakers. The voice instructs the player to use the command tape on Dog, the nightkin in the cage, so at that point the objective is clear, and this is where things begin to get interesting.
Dog, back in the cage. What have we here? You weren't who I was expecting. I'm disappointed.
Upon playing the audio log, which tells Dog to get back in the cage, the Nightkin stands upright and begins to speak with a much more calculated and even sinister tone. He likens the courier's Pip-Boy and bomb collar to his own chain around his neck and the bear trap stuck to his arm. He talks somewhat cryptically about how he sleeps in a cage, and when he's awake, that's when Dog goes back in the cage. He also refers to himself as Dog's conscience, as he tries to keep Dog from getting himself hurt, though judging by the various visible injuries that he's sustained, it's clear that Dog doesn't always listen. At this point, it's fairly apparent that this Nightkin has some type of multiple personality disorder, of which there are dialogue choices pertaining to medicine and science that guess at trauma and stealth boy usage respectively. He doesn't reveal exactly what caused the personality split, but he does reveal that Dog is willing to go as far as to inflict pain upon himself just to silence God. This information has a number of implications, but for now what's important to note is that it's clear neither of these personalities takes kindly to one another, and this will make a pretty big difference as the story proceeds. When asked why he's locked in the cage, God explains that he locks himself inside so as to protect himself and Dog from getting into trouble. Something we as the audience can see is rather imperative thanks to the bear trap and various other injuries sustained by the Nightkin. We also learn a rather curious piece of information regarding Dog, and it's that he swallowed a bomb collar. And this doesn't really make any sense. God explains that Dog once devoured a human with a bomb collar attached to them, and the way he was able to do this was by breaking it apart, claiming that any bomb collar is capable of being fragmented into individual pieces while still remaining active. That last bit I'm actually willing to buy, but how the fuck does the ravenous and notably stupid super mutant with massive hands break apart a bomb collar without causing it to explode? It's been established in prior Fallout games that the bomb collars can go off if they're tampered with, so there's no way that this big dumb brute could have chewed it apart without triggering it. Another issue is that it doesn't make sense to be able to hear Dog or God via their collar's radio signal with the pieces of their collar still inside of them.
Where is Master? Did he go away?
I guess the microphone piece got stuck in his teeth? No, but seriously, it's even weirder because God himself points out that it would be difficult to hear him with his collar in his stomach.
So perhaps it's a good thing that Dog swallowed his collar. Anyone listening would find it difficult to hear past the digestion.
Also, how the hell do the radios not trigger the explosive in his stomach when he's so close by? I mean, I know that super mutants are thick-skinned, but sound isn't something that can easily be blocked out, especially when there is so much of it surrounding you. This isn't even difficult to rewrite either, just say that this mutant swallowed a dude's entire head and make it to where we can't listen to him using the radio signal on our Pip-Boy. I can buy that this dude gulped down an entire head over him chewing a bomb collar in a way that miraculously did not detonate it, but that's not all he's got to say. Anyone looking to learn more about Elijah can ask God what he knows, but what he says just cryptically alludes to Sunburst, which many players will already know about from the base game. Although I will say that it would be kind of cool to learn about it in the opposite way, first hearing about Sunburst through Dead Money, then going back to the Brotherhood, meeting them and being like, oh that's the thing from Elijah, oh my god. But eventually the courier has had enough exposition and it's time to let Dog or God out of the cage. God explains that he has the key to the cell hanging from the back of his neck. Exactly how he managed to pull this off isn't explained, but it doesn't seem physically impossible, you know, like chewing a bomb collar, so I'll let that slide. The player now has two options. Either let Dog out of the mental cage by playing the holotape of Elijah's instructions, or convince God to step out of the cage by informing him that you don't intend to use Dog, playing to the ego of God. God tried to intimidate the player earlier on by saying Dog would devour them if let out hungry, but as it turns out, Dog is very easy to instruct, especially for anyone related in some way to his master. If the player commits to the latter, God will simply step out, at which point he becomes the player's squadmate, granting the handy companion perk in his footsteps. However, if the player lets the dog out, this will allow for the first true interaction with the big dumb doggo. He's an idiot, as expected. Some of you classic Fallout fans may have noticed Dog's use of the word master. When listening to Dog's idle audio, he mentions a church that he wants to return to. This, of course, is none other than the Cathedral, a location from the first Fallout game where worshippers of the super mutant master gathered. As it turns out, Dog was once a servant of the master. From this, we can infer that Dog's mental split likely occurred at some point following the death of the master, where its psychic link to the super mutants would have been severed, thus fracturing the mind of Dog. It's a really cool nod to the original Fallout, and I appreciate the added background to Dog and God's character. Going back to the station's basement, there's a lot of junk here that the player can use for crafting purposes. However, I find that the standard New Vegas crafting is ultimately kind of redundant in Dead Money, thanks to the inclusion of the Sierra Madre vending machines. Why bother taking up inventory space and risking becoming over-encumbered with crafting materials when you can just rely on Sierra Madre chips to get you whatever you want? They're absolutely littered throughout Dead Money, they only take up one spot in the Miscellaneous section of the Pip-Boy, and most importantly, they don't weigh a thing. And the vending machines offer a lot of supplies that either can't be crafted or would simply be far too difficult to craft, such as weapon repair kits and stim packs. Furthermore, there are far more vending machines than there are workbenches in the Sierra Madre. There's a total of 13 vending machines in the Sierra Madre, and only 4 workbenches, 2 in the villa and 2 in the casino. Reloading stations where you craft ammo are equally as scarce. As for cooking, yeah, have fun with that one. So even if you wanted to craft supplies at a workbench, you would need to have memorized the only 2 locations per area you can even find a workbench at, and find your way back to them whenever you need to, which in itself could make for a risky journey depending on where you are in terms of progression. I wouldn't go as far as to say that the workbenches or reloading stations are useless. I often use them to craft ammo for my weapons using shells and casings I found lying around the environments, of which there are plenty. However, the only bench I really used was the one on the east side of the Villa Plaza. It is worth noting, however, that there is one particular exception to this criticism, and that applies to anyone using an explosive character build, where workbenches and reloading stations become key to managing your resources. Dead Money does not offer a lot in the ways of explosives. Players might stumble across a decent amount of frag grenades and mines, but they'd be hard-pressed on very hard difficulty, especially in hardcore mode, to be able to make these last. I was often starved for explosive weaponry. For explosive builds, the Mad Bomber perk is going to be absolutely critical because it allows the player to use the various junk items that litter the Sierra Madre to create powerful explosive weaponry. Nuka grenades and fat mines will not be possible to craft due to the absence of mini nukes and Nuka-Cola quartz in the Sierra Madre, leaving explosive build couriers with 5 craftable explosive weapon options. If you have the Nuka Chemist perk, you can make some Nuka-Cola quartz using 3 regular Nuka-Colas. However, the Sierra Madre isn't exactly overflowing with Nuka-Cola, so the amount that you'll be able to make is quite limited regardless. I don't even recall the last time I saw a bottle of Nuka-Cola in the Sierra Madre. There are several other weapons you'll be able to craft though thanks to the Mad Bomber perk, and since explosive builds will be relying so heavily on these, let's take a moment to talk about them. First, there's the Time Bomb. This powerful explosive device has a huge area of effect and can deal quite a bit of damage. At first, that might sound really great, but it's not the most practical weapon. The Time Bomb has a similar throwing animation to frag mines, meaning you won't be throwing it very far. On top of this is the countdown timer, a whopping 15 seconds, meaning that in order to really be able to make use of this, you're going to have to be able to toss it into a cluster of ghost people, get out of range very quickly, and not to mention remain undetected if you're on higher difficulties, as the ghost people can very easily kill you, especially if you're up in their face. Even with maxed out stealth, the ghost people are surprisingly perceptive, and if you're crouched, you'll typically be moving slower, meaning that it's gonna be difficult to remove yourself from the time bomb's effective range in time. The only way I could see that working would be if you invested in the stealth perk Tunnel Runner and also had the implant M5, but even then you'd be running a major risk being caught by the ghost people and being killed very quickly, so the time bomb is just not practical at all. Then there's the Microfusion cell grenade, which is easily the greatest of the bunch. The only material required to craft this is 3 Microfusion cells, which really isn't too bad, and it has a pretty wide blast radius. The damage is good, but not spectacular. It's basically a plasma grenade substitute. So if you're a fan of that, then you're probably going to be inclined to use as many MFC grenades as possible. There's also the much more powerful variant, the Mfc Grenade Cluster, and yeah, this thing is insanely powerful. It's a strap of 6 MFC grenades. I mean, yeah, it deals 6 times the damage if an enemy is hit by all of them, all but guaranteeing a one-shot kill. It does function differently, however, acting as a proximity detonation explosive. Why it does this, I do not have a fucking clue. So when an enemy steps into range of one of the MFC grenades from the cluster, that MFC grenade will trigger. This will most likely cause a chain reaction, as the MFC grenades rarely bounce that far away from one another. Since the trigger is proximity detonation, it can't be used in VATS. However, I find that I rarely use VATS when it comes to explosive weaponry anyways, so that negative impact is ultimately quite minimal. The one major drawback, of course, is that the MFC grenade cluster costs a whopping 18 microfusion cells to craft. So this is a weapon that you're going to want to craft very few of and be extremely sparing with. If you were to use one of these, I'd really only recommend using them on named NPCs or particularly threatening groups of ghost people, perhaps after triggering the Gala event. Ultimately though, I found myself sticking to the basic MFC grenade as the damage it dealt was adequate and the Sierra Madre is full of microfusion cells, provided you're exploring. If I had one complaint, it's that bulk microfusion cells crafted from drained MFCs can't be used to craft an MFC grenade, which, not gonna lie, it's kind of annoying as it made the bulk MFCs completely pointless, at least for this build. And finally there is the Tin Grenade, which will most likely be the second most crafted explosive weapon for any explosive build in Dead Money. The most noteworthy material needed to craft it is the pistol powder, which you can get tons of by breaking down the various ammo types littered throughout the Sierra Madre. It does require quite a bit of pistol powder, a rather demanding total of 50, but given how much ammo you stumble across, especially if you've got the Scrounger perk, this really won't be much of an issue. The only issue that I had as far as crafting materials, weirdly enough, was duct tape. I was genuinely ecstatic when I would stumble across duct tape because I knew that it meant I could finally craft more tin grenades. In retrospect, it was kinda hilarious. The tin grenade's damage isn't particularly impressive unfortunately, but it does what you need it to. And again, bear in mind, I'm playing on the highest possible difficulty settings, so were I to use this build on lower settings, I'm sure it would perform more than adequately. So yeah, explosive builds will be relying on workbenches and reloading stations to a pretty great extent, but as I stated previously, this is an exception. No other build will really be seeing much use here, or at the very least they won't be that reliant on them. This is both a positive and a negative. On the positive end of the spectrum, it's important for an expansion like this to make sure that at least the majority of its players are relying on the mechanics that separate this content from the rest of the game, that being the Sierra Madre vending machines rather than the standard workbenches and trading with NPCs. It helps in building an identity for the expansion as well as the Sierra Madre location, and overall I think it does a great job at just that. However, on the negative end of things, making so little use of the workbench in an environment that seems tailor-made for appealing to this type of mechanic does come off as wasted potential. I'll be the first to say that I rarely use workbenches as it is. I've just never been particularly engaged with New Vegas' crafting system, other than when it's necessary. Dead Money was certainly the first time I ever felt incentivized to use workbenches as much as I do, but by the end of the expansion I'm typically overflowing with items and resources even on the hardest modes. The amount that you'll find yourself capable of making just with the vending machines makes the crafting stations seem all but redundant. Granted, you won't be getting nearly as much from the vending machines if you don't get that precious Sierra Madre snow globe. Again, it gives you a whopping 2,000 Sierra Madre chips, but even then, if you just look around a bit, you'll be able to find plenty of chips, especially if you have the Fortune Finder perk. If I were to try to come up with a solution to this, I think what I would propose is a set of perks that you can unlock by doing certain things or reaching certain milestones in Dead Money. These perks would allow the player to do something different with the vending machines. Maybe a science-related perk where the player can hack into the vending machines and make energy-based ammo rather than the conventional ammo that it's restricted to. Maybe a repair-oriented perk that allows the player to take relevant information from the vending machine holodisks and convert that into crafting recipes, at the cost of breaking and not being able to use said holodisk at the vending machines, thus preventing the acquisition of given items in the Sierra Madre machines. Maybe if the players already visited Big Mountain in Old World Blues, they could have figured out how to craft certain mechanical items that the vending machines have to offer, since the vending machines are entirely absent from Big Mountain. These are just a couple of ideas, and while I don't think the lack of incentive to use workbenches is a particular low point, it does feel like something of wasted potential. I guess it makes sense canonically, as the vending machines are basically matter reconfiguration devices, whereas workbenches are just, well, workbenches, but I don't think that should necessarily hinder it on a mechanical level, at least not to the extent that it seems to. It also doesn't help that the workbenches are so hindered by the lack of availability of items needed to make certain important supplies. For those looking to cook, stim packs require Brock flowers and Xander roots, neither of which are available in Dead Money. Obviously, it would make little sense for these items to be in the Sierra Madre, and the vending machines make up for this, but wouldn't it have been interesting to stumble across a new recipe for making stim packs, thus making the cooking station serve more of a purpose? Again, I'm just spitballing ideas, but I do wish that a bit more thought and care had been placed into the crafting mechanics. Moving on from the police station, let's now check out the Sierra Madre Clinic. The path to the clinic is actually pretty short, with little in the ways of note that we didn't already discuss going to and exploring the police station. There's another of Dean Domino's stashes, some speakers, a couple of ghost people, but really that's about it. It's mostly what's inside the clinic that makes things interesting. The first thing I feel inclined to point out would have to be the hologram security. The holograms have to be one of the most crucial aspects of Dead Money, both in terms of gameplay and also the story. Much like the ghost people that inhabit the villa, the holograms are, well, ghosts. They're electronic ghosts that are impossible to kill or damage because they're light-based digital projections. These things are fucking creepy. The hologram projections in the Sierra Madre are very purely mechanical in that they follow a very simple directive. For the hologram vendors, they facilitate trade. For the security holograms, they warn unauthorized personnel to turn the other way and kill trespassers on sight. No questions asked. But the hologram vendors are peculiar because they seem to have the capacity to understand, at least to some extent, the manner in which trade is handled in the post-nuclear world. Father Elijah has mentioned that he's tampered with the hologram technology, so it seems that he repurposed them to function this way. When going into trade with a hologram vendor, both you and the vendor will have 0 caps on hand, as you were stripped of all resources prior to reaching the Sierra Madre. This would imply that anyone else brought here would have been stripped of their caps as well, so the vendors have no way of acquiring them either. The result here is pure trade. You give one item and based on its value, you're offered so many caps. If you want an item that the vendor carries, your traded items must exceed the understood value of the item that you're looking to get. It's really simple, but it makes for such an interesting spin on the usual economy of the game. Having a trade system completely without a standard of currency is genuinely fascinating, and I think future Fallout titles could really learn a thing or two from this. Imagine a settlement that doesn't use any form of currency, where what you trade must in some way share value with what you're wanting. It's simple, but it can make for really interesting trading scenarios. What's interesting about the hologram technology in the Villa Clinic is that it'll be set to a path on either the first floor or the upper office floor. I'm not really sure why the security is set to function this way though. The workers of the Villa are established in the lore to have little understanding of the functions of the technology in the Sierra Madre, but this is one of those things that just kind of makes me scratch my head. What good is a security system that only covers one floor at a time, until manually switched over? I haven't found any text logs or environmental hits that explain this bizarre design choice. Even if there was a log explaining this, I'm not entirely sure if I'd be convinced of its utility. It's just really odd, but at least it works as a sort of gameplay tutorial for dealing with the holograms. When going up the steps to the offices, you'll notice the hologram is roaming the halls. The hologram can kill you very quickly, so you need to look for ways to disable it. Since it's a digital construction, your first thought will most likely be to check for nearby terminals. The wall-mounted terminal on the south side staircase will allow you to set the path of the hologram to either the top or bottom floor. This is something of a half measure, but any player with a pair of eyes will almost definitely notice the glowing blue device on the wall of the office floor. The device can either be smashed, destroying the hologram it's projecting, or it can be disabled with a high enough repair skill. This is the only way to completely eliminate a hologram. However, much like in the tutorial area, any hologram projector that you come across is going to require a few extra steps to reach safely. It's a solid way to introduce the player to the security holograms. I only wish it didn't come at the cost of ludonarrative dissonance, even if it was mostly very minor in the grand scheme of things. Regardless, that's not all that the clinic has to offer in terms of environmental design. There's a pretty neat little bit of environmental storytelling in the emergency room where you can find the assassin's suit. Why on earth would this be here? This armor couldn't have belonged to a Villa inhabitant, so it must belong to one of Elijah's victims. The armor's in decent enough condition, so why wouldn't anyone else have taken it? These questions do have answers, but that will have to wait for later. Down the hall from the emergency room are various rooms containing autodocs. There's also a speaker emitting frequencies that can trigger your explosive collar, but we'll get to that in a moment. Autodocs are machines capable of performing numerous surgical procedures as well as injecting various types of medicine, most notably Med-X and adrenaline shots. These things aren't particularly effective when it comes to healing, which makes sense given that they're at least 2 centuries old and haven't exactly been preserved in pristine condition, but the adrenaline shots they provide on hardcore mode can be very useful for keeping your sleep gauge down to a healthy level, without the cost of hunger and hydration that typical sleeping would lead to. However, this adrenaline shot only cures exhaustion, so if your sleep deprivation hasn't reached its first stage, your status will remain the same. That being said, the only other place that you'll find one of these is deep within the casino, so you need to make sure that you manage your time well. Otherwise, you'll have to journey back to the clinic or to the police station so as to manage your sleep. Personally speaking, I only found my character growing tired once per playthrough. You could hand-wave that as my experience talking, but I would like to remind you that this also applies to my first playthrough I did when preparing for these videos, which was also my first time playing hardcore mode since I was in high school back in 2010. The point here is that Dead Money isn't exactly a million-hour experience, so even though options for handling sleep are pretty limited, it's not as if you're going to be desperately tracking down a bed or an autodoc station. Not unless you've just been wasting a great deal of time. At that point, it really is your own fault though, so I don't know what to tell you. I actually think it's a pretty well-balanced experience in that regard. Going into this little journey of mine, I was expecting hardcore mode to be a much more frustrating experience than it was. Handling hunger and hydration was equally as well balanced. The vending machines offer all you could ask for in the ways of food and water, and there's a relatively abundant degree of food and water to be looted if you've got a knack for exploring. Obsidian struck a fantastic balance here because even though you've got to maintain your hunger, hydration, and sleep at all times on hardcore mode, the rewards you're allotted for exploring, which has already been subtly incentivized as discussed earlier, make handling these factors much more feasible. I would say it leans a bit towards not even being much of an issue, but again, I've got literally thousands of hours of experience in New Vegas. Even if 99.9% of that was not in hardcore mode, I still have a pretty thorough grasp on exploration and such, so make of this what you will. At the very least, I can say that if the player knows what they're doing, even on the hardest possible difficulty settings, maintaining these stats shouldn't be too much of a problem. Much like the police station, the clinic has a basement. It's just smaller and has much less going on in terms of junk supplies. And if I'm being honest, it's just a little too low effort for my tastes. Down here is a terminal that doesn't require a passcode that will shut off the main power to the clinic. Doing this is required to shut off the speakers, but it doesn't turn off the clinic's lights, security holograms, autodocs, or upstairs terminals. I guess it could be explained as those things having backup generators that would prioritize them over the speakers, but I don't know, Chef. It's a bit weird. There's also a couple of generators right next to the terminal, but destroying them has no discernible effect. I feel like the easy way to improve this is to give the terminal an easy lock, and if you do have to smash the generator, you do so risking missing out on lore notes from other terminals as well as the ability to use the auto docks. That could have made for an interesting gameplay scenario, at least I think. But now that the speakers are down, the player can now find the source of the pounding noise that's been going and going. This is Christine, and you may have noticed the scars on her head and throat. Alright, so Christine is mute. The Autodoc performed some kind of surgery on her throat that fucked with her vocal cords. Do you see the problem here? Christine is wearing a bomb collar, but this machine has been able to perform a complex surgery on her throat, apparently multiple times, over the course of 2 weeks? How are you alive? The Autodocs have adrenaline shots to cure exhaustion, but last I checked, they can't solve hunger and hydration, so what the fuck? I mean, I guess I can buy that she kept some supplies on her person and it makes sense that she would know how to ration. I don't know, man. These are some mental gymnastics I'm having to make. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's nowhere near as fucking stupid and moronic as a kid being locked in a refrigerator for 200 plus years, but hey, it's still really far-fetched, even for Fallout. And even with those adrenaline shots, yo homie, your brain needs some sleep. I mean, I guess I can buy that she slept between the operations, but I don't know, she developed claustrophobia from her time in this machine, so at a point she must have stopped sleeping, or at least sleeping healthily. She should be off her fucking rocker at this point. When she's released, she's a bit apprehensive as she doesn't even know who the courier is, but that's really about the extent of it. With a little convincing or intimidation if you're a fucking monster, she can be swayed to follow or rendezvous at the Villa Fountain. I'm really torn because I like Christine as a character. She's generally a really nice person and a real wholesome ray of sunshine in the fucking hellscape that is the Sierra Madre, but a lot of the writing around her just doesn't make any sense, or at least it doesn't here. Also, her being mute is a real problem. I've already talked about how it affects gameplay, but engaging in dialogue with her is a fucking pain in the ass. Unless you're just really good at understanding and interpreting charades, the dialogue options you're given following her various text blocks are going to carry you through the whole experience. Personally speaking, I'm not the best when it comes to interpreting her charades. There were times I had it figured out, for instance when she pantomimes the 3 circles inside of a large one to reveal that she was a scribe in the Brotherhood of Steel. That was something I caught on to, and it felt pretty cool. But there's only so much that I can interpret without relying on the dialogue choices that follow to basically spell it out for me. And it really doesn't help that some of these text blocks just proceed way too fast for me to be able to read them. Without a voice to speak out the lines, Obsidian had to just leave the text block on a timer, and it really fucking shows. This is obnoxious. I'm sure one of you big brains that can speed read and speed interpret didn't have any fucking trouble with this, but I'm a fucking idiot, okay? I don't know what the hell half of the shit that she's doing is, and I've played this DLC like a million times. I don't necessarily think the text blocks themselves are a problem. I think they're described well writing-wise, but the way they're presented is less than adequate. That's really all I've got to say on the subject. I like Christine, but she is easily the weakest part of this DLC, and that's a real shame. Maybe if we ever got a remake, they could give her some animations and stuff to compensate. I don't know. The player might also be wondering how this bomb collar got on her neck in the first place, but given that she doesn't remember much after arriving at the Sierra Madre, it makes sense that this wouldn't be fully understood for the time being. Oh, and one last thing, I like her companion perk. Basically, she causes a delay in how the speakers and other devices futz with the bomb collar. It's really cool. So that about covers the Villa Clinic. Now, let's move on to the residential district. This is definitely where we get to see how the villa functioned as a shelter, and it has this tragic air of death to it, both figuratively and literally. It's not too often in Fallout that we get to see the ruins of people's homes, which sounds kind of weird now that I think about it. Let me explain. How many times in Fallout do you really get to explore the remains of a place that hasn't been picked apart by raiders and factions? A place where people lived before the war, and their remains still rest. It's a very specifically haunting aesthetic, and it's the kind of thing that I just eat up. Like the police station and the clinic, the residential district serves as something of a tutorial to introduce the player to certain aspects of Dead Money. In the police station, it was the radios. In the clinic, it was the hologram. Here in the residential district, the cloud is much more prevalent, with the streets being littered with concentrated pockets. There's also an abundance of traps placed very methodically throughout both the homes and the streets. Running recklessly through the pockets of cloud will often lead to unprepared players stepping onto bear traps or pressure plates wired with explosives or even rigged shotguns. The indoors are even more lined with traps, from grenade bouquets to pressure plates to bear traps to tripwires. These houses are not at all safe for the player to just waltz into, and some of the placements of the traps are genuinely quite tricky. You need to be careful when navigating the Sierra Madre, and this area is intended to make that especially clear to the player. And of course, we can't forget our friends, the ghost people. On top of dealing with all of these traps and cloud pockets, we've got to deal with these fuckers. However, that also means that they have to contend with the traps as well. These things might not be affected by the cloud, but if they step onto a pressure plate or bump into a grenade bouquet, it's bye-bye Casper. It is, however, important to bear in mind that they will not set off tripwires. It's a very oddly specific immunity that they have. I don't know why it's a thing, but that's okay because setting a frag mine next to a grenade bouquet and baiting a trapper into it, so goddamn satisfying. After overcoming all of these obstacles, the player will speak with Dean Domino, and oh my god, he is the best character in this DLC.
Get up without my permission. I'll blast your ass so far through your head, it'll turn the moon cherry pie red.
That is the greatest line of dialogue ever written.
Until
He's such a fucking prick, but goddamn, he's so charismatic and enjoyable to listen to. He's voiced by Barry Dennen, a voice actor with one hell of a background. He's best known for playing Pontius Pilate in Jesus Christ Superstar, but he portrayed Watson in The Shining, Mendel in Fiddler on the Roof, Adolf fucking Hitler in the original Wonder Woman TV series, and he also voiced Fat Man in Sons of Liberty and the Chancellor in Darksiders 2. They could not have picked a more perfect voice actor to play Dean Domino. So you meet Dean and he's like, "Hey bro, come take a seat." And you're like, "Okay, whatever." And that's when he goes, "Hey yo, so get this, lift that ass up, I blow that ass up. You now have a bomb on your neck and under your ass." Look, I'm into the kinky shit, but this is a little extreme. Domino basically wants to know what the fuck's going on, and he wants out. He also wants into the Sierra Madre, so the player can now either play along with him, or talk him into a corner and intimidate him, pushing him to either follow or meet at the fountain. However, like Christine and God, it might be wise to play the cards close to the chest, and not go too hard on the guy, just saying. At this point, all that's left is to return to the Villa Fountain, where the companions will have more to say should the player interact with them. God doesn't have too much to say, it's mostly just reiterating what he said about Elijah in the police station. Dean Domino talks a lot about the ghost people and previous captives of Elijah that he observed from a distance. Christine will mime out details of her past, such as the fact that she was a Brotherhood of Steel scribe, and that she was cut off from someone that she loves within the Brotherhood. I really like this particular point in the conversation where she explains, to the best of her abilities, why she's here in the Sierra Madre, then proceeds to turn the question around to us. This is great in regards to role-playing, as it allows the player to decide for themselves why their courier came to the Sierra Madre. It's a great example of dialogue options in New Vegas that really make the player stop and consider what they want to say moving forward. It doesn't have any noticeable consequences, it's just a great instance where the player has been addressed almost directly, and it allows them to decide for themselves the context in which has led their character here. Christine also explains that the scars on her head and face, as well as her being bald, occurred prior to arriving at the Sierra Madre, leaving her backstory open to speculation for the time being. Also, the companions will talk amongst themselves at the fountain. I appreciate these smaller moments where we get some fun banter establishing how they feel about one another. Really helps to add some depth and further establish their characters in small but meaningful ways. But that's all I have to say for today. Once again, I hope all of you are enjoying your time here, and that you're looking forward to the next video. Until next time.